Good morning, Year 8. It's Mrs. Reed here, and welcome to your English Mastery Monday lesson. Please make sure you have some lined paper, you have a pen, and you are distraction-free before you start. So today's starter activity is about reviewing your learning. So thinking about things you've learned in this topic, things you've learned in previous topics, and some vocab practice too. You may choose to complete all of the questions here, or you might choose to complete some of the questions. That's really over to you. But you have 5 minutes to have a go at revisiting your prior learning. If you choose to answer the questions in the vocabulary column, please make sure that you think about the word and its definition, and who in your recent learning this word might apply to and why. So if I'm thinking about the word intense, I might think, who have we used that adjective to describe recently and why? Pause the video, spend 5 minutes reviewing your learning. Okay, so we looked at how Carol has presented the Mad Hatter in recent lessons. We might have looked at the way in which his behaviour was strange and unpredictable, how he might seem somewhat tempestuous, changing from one mood to another very quickly, so being curious and asking questions of Alice and then suddenly being very angry at the Mad Hatter. We might have described the Mad Hatter as mercurial because we said his actions were sudden or unpredictable, a change in mood that happened very rapidly. We might have used the word notorious in a sentence, maybe to describe somebody, for example, like Jack the Ripper. I know we've been looking recently at how if somebody is notorious, they seem to become well known for their bad deeds and things they've done wrong. Going back to previous topics then, we looked at poetry before this unit. So what do we call an image that represents an abstract idea? Well, we often refer to that as a symbol. We say something is symbolic. Or the writer uses symbolism. So poetry provides writers with the opportunity to, wow, you could have had lots of answers here, so I'll go through a few from our unit. We said that poetry allowed writers to argue for social and political change, or to capture human experience, to describe significant and important moments in history, or to help us perhaps understand the lives and experiences of other people. There's lots of answers that you may have included here that would be right. Finally then, devotion to a love for one's country devotion to or a love for one's country is known as, well done if you got the word, patriotism or being patriotic. Okay, so let's go through the vocab. Somebody that is intense. Well, we talked about this word in relation to the Mad Hatter. So you might have had Mad Hatter who. Maybe he's intense because he asks these very direct questions of Alice, even if they are particularly hard to answer. Malevolent. Well, this is a character who has a desire to do harm to others, somebody evil. So we might have looked at Hyde, Mr. Hyde here, as a malevolent character. And we know he presents his very violent and aggressive reactions to different people. We have him attacking the old man and trampling on the small child. So particularly malevolent character. And mercenary. Well, we might describe somebody as mercenary if they are only interested really in gaining material wealth, if they're interested in earning money above all else. So perhaps in the autobiography that we read, we could describe P.T. Barnum as mercenary because he was exploiting people within his circus or freak show in order to make money himself. Okay, I'm glad we spent a bit of time recapping. Now let's have a look at some of our mastery writing practice. So the first task for you to do today is to write these sentences out in full. I would then like you to write in the correct verb, making sure that we change it into the past simple tense. Let's look at the first one together. Jen, something a new hat. So we need to look in the box here and decide which verb would fit. Well, in this case, it was the verb to buy. So we need to then put it into the past tense. The simple past being Jen bought a new hat. Okay, over to you. Pause the video and complete those sentences now. If you have a different colour pen, you may wish to use this to mark your answers. We'll go through them together. Zara and Mia, something their homework. Well, the word here is do, to do, so we'll change it in the past to did. Give yourself a tick if you got that one right. The Prime Minister, something a wreath at the cenotaph. Well, this would be the verb lay, so in the past tense is the verb laid. Check your spelling there and give yourself a mark if you got it right. Gavin, something a button onto his shirt. This is the word sew. So in the past tense, we end with ed. He sewed a button onto his shirt. And finally, Shuri, some crisps to the party. Well, I'm going to say here that this person decided to bring them to the party. We can't say that, so we would say brought. Okay, give yourself a tick if you got that one right. Okay, next up we're going to look at how we punctuate both a subordinate clause and a list within one sentence. So I'm just going to model for you how I would go about that process. There's 3 steps, and then I'm going to ask you to practice doing that in some models, some sentences of your own. Okay, let's have a look. The example sentence here is, as Kevin fell off his horse, rolled down the hill and landed in a puddle, he saw his life flash before his eyes. Well, currently the commas are missing from this sentence, so in order to put them in correctly, I'm going to follow these steps. First, I'm going to find the independent clause in the sentence. Remember, this is normally a subject and a verb and expresses one complete idea. So in this sentence, I can see that the independent clause actually comes at the end. He saw his life flash before his eyes. So I've identified first the independent clause. Next, I'm going to punctuate the subordinate clause. Well, in this sentence, the subordinate clause actually is at the start. It's been moved to the beginning of the sentence, so I must put a comma before the main clause, the independent clause. Now I can punctuate the list. Well, the list comes here after Kevin has fallen off his horse. So as Kevin fell off his horse, okay, I need a comma here to separate the item in the list. Rolled down the hill and landed in a puddle. He saw his life flash before his eyes. Okay, so I put in 2 commas into the sentence to correct the list and the subordinate clause, and now my sentence is correct. Over to you. That you have 5 sentences to write out and punctuate correctly. Remember, 1, identify the subordinate clause. 2, punctuate the... Okay, over to you. Now you have 5 sentences to copy and correct yourself. I would like you to 1, identify the independent clause. 2, punctuate the subordinate clause. And finally, punctuate the list. Pause the video and do that now, please. Okay, with a different coloured pen we can mark our answers. So this time the library is open on Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Well, this one is an independent clause. It just contains a list, so I just need to place a comma between Friday and Saturday. Number 2. Every Saturday evening they watched films whilst they ate popcorn, chocolate and crisps. Okay, let's find the independent clause. They watched films. That means that my subordinate clause has gone on the start, every Saturday evening. I need a comma there after the part that tells when. And my list is at the end, whilst they ate popcorn, comma, chocolate and crisps. Number 3. Whilst the pigs made evil plans, drank beer in the farmhouse and wore Mr. Jones's clothes, Boxer was completely unaware of what was going on. Okay, here my subject is Boxer. Boxer was completely unaware of what was going on. That's my main clause, independent clause. So I need to put a comma after the subordinate clause, that's here. And I need to find the list. Whilst the pigs made evil plans, comma, drank beer in the farmhouse and wore Mr. Jones's clothes. That's now correct. As the storm was wrecking the ship, Ariel appeared as fire, a demon, and even the sea god Neptune. Okay, so my main clause independent here is Ariel appeared as fire, a demon, and even the sea god Neptune. So my subordinate clause is at the start, as the storm was wrecking the ship, and my list goes here. Fire, comma, a demon, and even the sea god Neptune. Finally then, as he thought about the journey, Jason gathered up his keys, wallet, phone and watch. Okay, well, Jason gathered up his, and all of this last bit, keys, wallet, phone and watch, that's our independent clause. So put a comma here before it starts to separate it from the subordinate clause. And finally, find my list. Keys, comma, wallet and phone. Okay, give yourself a mark out of 5. So if we use lists in a prepositional phrase, we can tell about all the different places that something has happened. So let's look at the example here. I like to play in my room, at my friend's house, and at my cousin's flat. The first part, I like to play, is an independent clause. It has a subject, I, and the main verb, like, so it makes sense on its own. The last part of the sentence, seen here in purple, is the prepositional phrases in my room, at my friend's house, and at my cousin's flat. And we can see that they're punctuated just like a normal list. We know then if we move the prepositional phrase to the front of the sentence, we must add a comma after that prepositional phrase to show that it's been moved out of its normal place. And this is the same for a prepositional phrase that includes a list. So in my room, comma, at my friend's house, and in my cousin's flat, comma, I like to play. Full stop. Let's have a look at punctuating some sentences correctly. So George Orwell wrote books in a cafe, at his friend's house, and on the streets of Paris. Okay, well, he's not at a cafe in his friend's house, so we need to make sure there's a list here. George Orwell, that's our subject. Wrote, okay, that's our verb. So we've got actually this independent clause at the start. We need then to separate the commas in a list. In a cafe, comma, at his house, and on the streets. And now that one's correct. So go through each one, please. And fix them up. Make sure that you have put the commas in the correct place, and you can use a similar strategy to what we've used in the previous task. Pause the video and do that now, please. Right, grab yourself another colour pen and let's mark. He lived in India, comma, England, comma, France and Spain. So 2 in that sentence. In the barn, still a list here, isn't it? In the field and at the water trough all the animals were working hard. So we need a comma here because that first bit is a prepositional phrase which makes a subordinate clause. Okay, the workhouse, Animal Farm and Caliban's Island were all places where people worked for little or no pay. Can you see here the list is at the start, so we need a comma after workhouse. Okay, and that's correct. Titania. Okay, Puck put the love potion on Lysander, Demetrius and Titania. And finally then, Dickens, Orwell and Conan Doyle wrote stories that were published in England. So we need to put a comma between Dickens and Orwell. Okay, give yourself a mark out of 6. Alright then, so we've looked at the difference between fragments and subordinate clauses. So a fragment we know is an incomplete sentence. It doesn't have a subject or a verb, so it doesn't make sense on its own. A subordinate clause are parts of a sentence. So they add information to the independent clause. They also do not make sense on their own, but they may contain a subject and a verb. Okay. Let's have a look then. So I want you to, for each one, decide, is it correct, i.e. is it a sentence, or is it a fragment? If it's correct, does it have a temporal clause or a prepositional phrase? Does it tell us what time? Is it to do with time, or is it to do with where something happens? Okay, time or place. So in the first one, I call my aunt at 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock. Well, we have a subject and a verb. Okay, so it is correct. And I can see that this is temporal. This is to do with time. Okay, so for each one, please decide whether it's a fragment or correct. If it's correct, make sure you say whether it has a temporal clause or prepositional phrase. Pause the video, do that now, and we'll mark in just a couple of minutes. Okay, let's go through those answers then. So number 1 was correct, it was a temporal clause. Number 2, unless this behaviour stops soon, well, that doesn't make sense on its own. It is just a fragment. Number 3, that sentence is correct and it contains a prepositional phrase. It tells us where things happen. Look, on top of my locker and in my garden. Although the bottle was smooth and green, just a fragment. Number 5, also just a fragment. Doesn't make sense on its own. Number 6, it landed in the bin is correct. Okay, it has a prepositional phrase, tells us where or something goes. It goes in the bin. And number 7 is also correct and it contains a prepositional phrase. Well done if you spotted that. And that was to the back of the bus. Okay, give yourself a mark out of 7. Okay, so depending on the time that it's taken you to get here, you may wish to end the video at this point if you have used your 45 minutes to an hour already. If you still have time, please go on to this task. So, you're going to be writing an action story. So it builds on the problem and solution story structure that we've practiced in the past. So it's important to remember that when a hero escapes danger in an action story, this is normally through skill and not through magic. We'll learn about magical stories and fantasy quests at a later date, so for now we're just looking at the structure of an action story. It has 4 parts: the opening, where we meet a hero who's attempting a difficult task and has one extraordinary skill that will help them. It has part 2, this is the problem, where the hero encounters some kind of difficulty along the way. Part 3 is the solution. So they're going to use their wonderful skill to overcome the problem and therefore accomplish the task. And part 4, we have the happy ending. Our hero is rewarded in some way. The final task for you to do today is write an outline of your story. Basically, you're creating yourself a plan. There is an example one written here for you. You may use this. And you have your protagonist there, Bill. You can use him as your main character. You can also use any of the words in the vocabulary box at the bottom of the screen to help tell your story. I'd like you to spend at least 10 minutes on this planning task. So pause the video and complete your plan now. When you finish this lesson, you can send evidence of your work to your teachers by uploading your work to Show My Homework. And I hope you all have a lovely day.